Imagine it's 2020 and you're sitting on your sofa watching YouTube and you see the latest announcement of Marvel movies and shows on Disney's Investors Day, when they dropped the announcement of a show named What If. Then come 2021 we get the first season of it and it's pretty good. Then Christmas time in 2023 we get the second season and it isn't as good. So Marvel pulled out the big brain move and ended the show, which shouldn't really have an end, since there are an infinite amount of possibilities of what they could have done, and this disappointed many. However, putting all of that aside, the final season is out after dropping daily episodes, and let's talk about it.
What if?
And as always, there will be spoilers in this, so come back after watching it.
On your left.
The first episode of season 3 just so happens to give us Pacific Rim and Godzilla all in the same episode. The premise of this episode is that Sam befriends Banner, but Banner doesn't want Sam to see his greener half, and does this gamma experiment that results in the evil part of the Hulk soul splitting from Banner and manifesting into a literal monster. And so the Avengers build a bigger version of the Hulkbuster suit in order to fight them. But it turns out that the Monster Hulk is also giving birth to like an army of Monster Hulks. This leads to the current generation of Avengers featuring Monica Rambeau, Shang-Chi, Moon Knight, Bucky, Nakia, and led by Sam Wilson, Captain America, who team up to take down the monster. But it's ultimately Banner who uses a gamma nuke to power up into Hulk 2. He becomes the Ultra Giga Chad Hulkzilla, or by the more boring name Mega Hulk, and he defeats the evil master Monster Hulk, and this leads to Mega Hulk becoming the Alpha Hulk of all of the Hulks, and he saves the Earth through the power of friendship. I've said Hulk too many times in that sentence. Now this episode is an interesting concept, but it does need to be longer for it to fully hit. Like, we get 2 minutes of this friendship thing between Banner and Sam, and it's okay, but the premise of the ending is that their friendship is so strong that Mega Hulk won't attack them, which does feel kind of lacking. The new Avengers theme though is pretty cool to see, because it does give us a glimpse of the potential lineup in Doomsday, and it's refreshing to see it in comparison to the other seasons of What If, which stuck to mainly Infinity Saga characters. But overall this episode was okay. Like, it wasn't emotionally hitting, but it felt like a normal episode of What If, and for that reason this gets a 6 out of 10.
Some sparks flew, that's for sure.
Episode 2 brings us the What If of both the Eternals movie and Agatha All Along, and honestly this was actually pretty good. So in this episode we see that instead of stealing the power of witches throughout the 20th century, Agatha is a Hollywood star who stole the power of the Eternals, except for Kingo. Similarly to the Eternals movie, Kingo is also a movie star, and Agatha wants to star in a movie with him, but it turns out that she wants to steal his powers so that she can stop Tiamat's emergence and then take Tiamat's powers. Kingo, however, doesn't know this, and the two team up to stop Tiamat, and Erisham arrives, but just before she steals Kingo's powers and becomes a massive celestial ghost herself and punches the crap out of Erisham. Then she goes power hungry, but Kingo talks her out of it, and we see that the other celestials have arrived to attack the Earth. This episode was actually surprisingly good, seeing that the giant celestial ghost version of Agatha was actually pretty cool, and it kinda gave us a glimpse of what Eternals 2 would have been had it not been cancelled. We probably would have got the Eternals fusing together to become a giant Eternal and then fought Erisham. Oh wait, wasn't that last episode? And somehow it does have me excited for a potential Eternals 2 if that ever happens. Though I do feel like Marvel will still somehow fumble it again. And this time the show does the development of the main friendship between the two leads of this episode much more impactful than it was in episode 1. So overall this is a pretty good entry to the show, and this gets a 7 out of 10.
I feel like I'm speaking a different language here.
This is by far the best episode yet, and there are some crazy reveals in this installment. In this episode we see what would have happened had the Red Guardian stopped the Winter Soldier from killing the Starks. The two are then on the run from Goliath and Ranger Morales, who may or may not have a relative named Miles. Then both the Red Guardian and Bucky become friends, whilst they also meet this mysterious Rook who sent out the hit against the Starks, and that turns out to be none other than Obadiah Stane, which was a reveal that was kind of under our nose the whole time, but it just makes sense. The Red Room then sends men after the two, and they all fight, and the episode ends with Bucky returning back to Hydra and the Red Guardian becomes a PE teacher turned Avenger. But the Watcher does give us some cryptic clues that this friendship didn't end so well. This episode was so good. The dynamic between the Red Guardian and Bucky was so unexpectedly good and enjoyable that it has me excited for the Thunderbolts, where we will see more of this relationship. Also, this is a what if of a major event in the MCU, and yet this episode gives us an entertaining what if whilst also answering questions we never even thought to ask. Like the reveal that it was Obadiah Stane behind the murder of the Starks was so unexpected, but also plausible to have, since this whole time in the MCU we thought that they were just killed simply to take the super soldier serum, but it was a hit by Obadiah Stane so that he can take over the company. This episode also shows us what a good person and friend Alexei is, which is something that Black Widow didn't do that well, because in that movie he felt more like comic relief rather than a hero. Like in this, he helps Bucky somewhat resist the brainwashing, and it does make his character even more lovable. So this episode gets an 8.5 out of 10. This episode was so weird, but cool at the same time. So in this episode we see that Howard the Duck and Darcy got married, which is just so crazy and weird, but expected from a Howard the Duck story. And the couple give birth to an egg, which apparently has magical powers since it was born during the convergence or something. So as a result, everyone wants the egg. Now when I say everyone, I mean literally everyone. Like we have the likes of Nick Fury, the Frost Giants, Malekith and the Dark Elves, and even, wait for it, Zeus, the king of all the gods. Eventually the egg kinda uses its magic powers to zap everyone and then hatches and returns to Darcy and Howard. As I said, this episode was so bonkers. Like we have Zeus appearing in the show, but it's also just so stupid as to why he appears, but at the same time, it makes sense. Like the egg is essentially the equivalent of the one above all in this universe, and seeing Nick Fury and Zeus chasing Howard the Duck was not on my 2024 bingo card, but it was surprisingly enjoyable. And also this gives us a somewhat coherent story, which they could have very easily turned into a complete mess. But there is a story you can follow and you're not left confused. And so overall, this episode gets an 8 out of 10.
We pick up all kinds of stuff floating around here.
This is the episode where stuff begins to change. In this episode, we see what would have happened to the Earth had the emergence not been stopped by the Eternals. As a result, Quentin Beck took over Stark Industries and went absolutely insane and pretty much took over the entire world. And using White Vision, he pretty much killed every hero besides a few. The main one of which being Ironheart, but also the likes of Wong, Valkyrie and others. But Riri basically defeats White Vision, absorbs his armor and then punches the crap out of Mysterio. However, just as she's about to and supposed to lose, the Watcher intervenes, and this is not allowed. But in the end, Riri defeats Beck and brings hope to a universe. Now, the tone of this episode was very serious compared to the others, and it was actually good, because this episode shows us what it truly means to be a hero whilst also developing the overall plot of the whole show. And it feels refreshing to see this compared to the jokiness that Marvel does all the time. And if the Ironheart show is as serious as this, I might actually enjoy it, who knows. Also seeing Mysterio as the main villain of an episode was a surprise because, you know, he is a Sony character, but I do kind of wish that the emergence did go through in the MCU, just because it gives us such an interesting storyline that could have been Avengers 5. So overall, this episode gets a 7.5 out of 10. It was good, but not great. Let's travel back to 1872. Where we see Shang-Chi aka the Ten Rings and Kate Bishop aka the Hawkeye as cowboy era heroes protecting the people and fighting against the Hood. They eventually go to fight the Hood and to help a kid named Jun Fan, and the Hood turns out to be Shang-Chi's sister Xu Xiaoling. The two then fight before Kate shoots her dead, but the Watcher once again intervenes, saving the kid from a bunch of bad guys, and this time he's in big trouble with his superiors, the Watcher of the Watchers, and he gets imprisoned. This episode was kind of average. Like, the concept of this episode was interesting, and seeing the Watcher trying to provide hope to various universes through the means of friendship or heroism or other forms. Marvel seems to have this trend of making the most boring episode but then dropping such a massive cliffhanger ending that it carries the arc for the rest of the show. Like, they did this with Loki, they did this with Agatha, they do this with pretty much every show. And so this episode gets a 7 out of 10.
Infinity.
This is the first of a two-part story which will end in the finale. Basically, the Watcher is in big trouble with the Eminence, the Incarnate and the Executioner, but they're also mad at him for pretty much designating Captain Carter as the multiverse hero. It turns out that she has formed a team of her own, known as the Exiles, featuring herself, Storm, the Goddess of Thunder, Kahuri from last season, and Birdie, the daughter of Howard the Duck and Darcy. They see these fragments of the dimensional border between the fifth dimensional and normal reality fracture into the universe, and so they realize that the Watcher's in trouble and they try to figure out a way to help him. So they turn to the only person who had broken into the fifth dimension, Infinity Ultron, who turns out that after spending eons alone by himself, he realizes that true peace cannot be attained by killing everyone who can bring peace. So they all team up to save the Watcher and Captain Carter, who got kidnapped by the Eminence. This episode really does serve as a precursor for the finale, but it was just really cool seeing Storm finally return in a real non-X-Men related project, and the return of Kahuri was cool as well, because she was one of my favourite characters from season 2. And also Birdie being the daughter of Howard the Duck and Darcy was a twist I didn't expect, because somehow her storyline has managed to flow through 3 different seasons, and she has just as much of a storyline as Captain Carter has over these 3 seasons. But it is refreshing to see a new lead in the show that isn't Captain Carter, but it does have me optimistic for the finale, so this gets a 7 out of 10.
Nothing can matter to a Watcher, for a Watcher is no one.
The finale begins with us seeing the Watcher take his sacred oath to watch over the multiverse and to never interfere. Then it cuts to him facing judgment for interfering. Apparently he's done this way more times than we have seen on screen. Like for example, he helped a variant of Reed Richards. Very curious to see why, though it most likely was just a reference rather than anything too deep. Then the other superior Watchers summon Captain Carter and both are sentenced to death. But Ultron arrives and holds off the Watchers. This leads to an all-out brawl between the Exiles and the Watchers. The only way the Exiles even stand a chance against the Watchers though, is to take the Sacred Oath and become Watchers themselves. They then fight and are about to win, but they give the Watchers a chance to amend their ways. But this is a very big mistake, because the Watchers decide that they want to erase every single version of every single character there from existence. But Captain Carter sacrifices herself and sends them to a universe that Doctor Strange had made at the end of season 2. They then all come to terms with the fact that the Watcher can interfere, and they mourn the loss of Captain Carter, but it seems as though she's ascended to a plane higher than the Watchers, so she's like a 6th dimensional being now. We then see a bunch of different variants of other characters, including Spider-Man, Hulk, Kingo and others. Now, I said I was optimistic of the finale, and it was very underwhelming, because last episode made it seem like something crazy was gonna happen in this episode, like a multiverse shattering, dimensional shattering event, but all they did was fight, and it didn't even have a point in the end because no one really died. No one was really replaced either, like the other Watchers are still there. Captain Carter's the only one who really took the damage. They did Infinity Ultron so dirty as well, because it seemed like he was finally about to have his redemption arc, but he gets like one-shotted and wiped from existence within 2 seconds. But there is one good thing in the show, and that is that this still kinda does make sense with the theme that they're trying to present in the show. Because the whole point of the show is to show that anything is possible in the multiverse, and that heroes can come from the unlikeliest places if there is someone there to believe in them. And this does capture that idea, but the execution of it just could have been much better. So this episode gets a 6 out of 10.
What if?
As for my thoughts overall, this season was okay. The first 6 episodes were actually good and felt like a show about different what ifs, but the last 2 remind you that at the end of the day, this show is ultimately about the Watcher and Captain Carter. Comparing it to the other season, it's definitely better than season 2, because that season only had 3 or 4 episodes that were actually what ifs, and the remainder of the season was just Captain Carter like hopping through time and helping the Watcher. But this season isn't as good as the first one, but I guess the first season did have the element of surprise with us guessing what each episode would be about, because they hadn't leaked the entire episode lineup before the show's release. And I know I'm repeating pretty much everyone on the internet when I say this, but this definitely should have just been an anthology show rather than something with a coherent storyline, because the idea of what if is that anything is possible, and they could have answered some insane questions, but instead they just pretty much focused on Captain Carter. So if they do somehow make a season 4, I really do hope it's just the Watcher watching stuff. I mean, I don't mind the Watcher interfering every now and then, because it does have this element of interest. The Watcher really should have just been a pathway for us, the viewers, to watch all these stories. And whenever a hero is about to lose that we're really rooting for, that's when the Watcher should have intervened. A lot like when Ironheart lost earlier on in the season. But instead, it just felt like the Watcher was just doing his own thing half the time. But overall, this season is a 6.5 out of 10. Like, it still could have been better, and What If Zombies is still somehow the best episode of the show so far. And as a result, this show gets a 7 out of 10. Subscribe and comment below your thoughts.